Commission meeting of Wednesday, March the 4th. Would you take roll, please, Mr. Schmidt?
Yes. Mr. Dahlbeck.
Present.
Mr. Husnick.
Here.
Mr. Munson is absent. Mr. Schmidt is here. Mr. Steeler.
Present.
4 out of 5 are here. Thank you.
And the minutes from the last meeting, are there any changes or additions? And if not, is there a motion to approve the previous minutes?
I did look through them. I didn't recall anything that I noticed.
I did not see anything that needed adjusting either.
I'll make a motion to pass
Have
them
a
as
motion to
All right,
approve.
second.
Second to approve. All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
is. Aye.
So approved. And next on the agenda is Bolton and Mink. Silas.
Well, thanks for the time again. We'll hold off on kind of the master plan update until I get through the update to kind of talk about some of the other things here. So the runway, taxiway, and apron pavement maintenance project, all the contracts and everything were signed by council. Aztec is the contractor. They got their copy back. I spoke with them last week, and they said they'll be able to put a schedule together once they get a better idea of when MnDOT's going to be lifting road restrictions. With the weather we're having, I wouldn't be surprised if that comes in late April, early part of May. So the big thing from them is getting a schedule, because there are going to be some runway closures there and different parts of the taxiway closed. So try to coordinate that with the Airport Commission as soon as possible, and then put some notices out at the airport with the approximate schedule so people can kind of plan their flights accordingly. So I'm hopeful that the next meeting would be now in May. So likely construction could be starting on or around that time frame. But if anything changes between now and then, I'll make sure Mr. Undum is aware and he can communicate that with you guys. I'll jump down to kind of number 3 on the list, kind of the pump and card reader system. As Mr. Undum explained at the December and January meetings, that the current system, the QT Pro Minnesota Petroleum, is unable to serve and maintain anymore, so they're in need for an upgrade. Mr. Undum, I'm not sure if you've gotten quotes yet on that stuff.
The quote package for the pump itself, and I'm waiting for the install side right now. So I do have the upgraded card reader side, and I'm just waiting to hear back to make sure that I get the full out-the-door price.
So we did put it on the CIP anyways, and kind of put a guesstimate of 20,000 on there, so that if MnDOT does find funding for it, at least you can be eligible for their state fiscal year 21, which will be beginning July 1 of 2020. So it is something the city can get completed this year. Well, I guess that discussion kind of rolls right into kind of the CIP. So attached in your packet is also the capital improvement program. So MnDOT took a snapshot of this on February 1 of this year for state fiscal year 21 projects. So if you recall, we had discussions in the January meeting about which projects to put on there to try to take advantage of state funding for 2021. And the 4 that we identified was then construct the east taxi lanes, extend the utility, sanitary, and water to the east taxi lanes, expand the apron 100 by 25 for kind of a hard surface for tie downs, and then, as I mentioned, the avgas and the pump card reader system. So the expectation still is MnDOT would fund these projects at 90% state, 10% local. The plan is MnDOT will release their list of funded projects in either April or May, and at that time, Mr. Undum will get an email about that, and then we can reevaluate the projects here with the Airport Commission. But those were kind of the 4 projects that we pushed or prioritized for state fiscal 21. And as we've been discussing, some of the other project priorities may get revised based on the results of the master plan. So I'll pause there if anyone's got questions about those items.
We just need to make sure that we publish a NOTAM when the runway is closed.
Correct.
How much notice will there be? Do you have any idea? A week?
We have it set up as if before, we need 5 days notice before they close the runway, just so that there's enough notice for pilots operating at the airport. But that also gives us time where if, let's say, a member of the Airport Commission hears, hey, so-and-so needs to get in or get out on this particular date, then we can coordinate that back with the contractor and shift the schedule around. But that's the plan, to get as much notice as possible.
The one thing that's encouraging on the pump, the fuel pump, that's a 70/30. Usually it's a 50/50, so that's a helper.
Yeah, so what MnDOT, well, I won't go into the long story, but essentially in 2003, the airport fund was robbed to balance the general fund, $15 million. That money came back to MnDOT in 2015, and they appropriated that over 4 years, and it was such a successful project that they were able to prove to the state legislature the MnDOT appropriation for aeronautics every biennium needed to go up. So it got raised to 19.5 million, so 9.5 million in each year. So it kind of worked out well. So MnDOT and the legislature sees that there's a demand for funding for airports. So they've been able to increase the appropriation and keep the funding participation rates higher. So Mr. Husnick is correct. It went from 50/50 for fuel to 70/30.
Yeah, that sure helps the city portion of it anyway, so. Okay.
And then I'm not sure, do we want to go right to the master plan presentation or come back afterwards if you want to get through the other agenda items?
I say keep going.
Yeah, might as well keep going.
All right, with that, I'll bring Chris Gardner up here with me. As you guys know, he's an aviation planner with Bolton and Menk. So what we're here now for is kind of the update meeting number 2 for the master plan. If you recall, the first meeting, we discussed kind of the inventory, which is essentially collecting inventory of all the airport there, taking photos, data collection of the facilities that you have, the runway lighting, fuel, the beacon, those types of things. The next part was to put out user surveys out there for users and business surveys to actually be able to develop an aviation forecast and then an activity forecast. And then as part of that, the user surveys, we also looked at the facility requirements. So what the users of the airport or prospective users of the airport say, these are the facilities that we like at Forest Lake, the facilities that we'd like to see at Forest Lake for the future, and the facilities that we would need to base and operate at Forest Lake. So what we've done now is kind of take all that data together, and the next step of that is putting it together now on paper, which was sent out to you guys earlier this week in terms of the alternatives. So what alternatives are is it just shows you a number of different options to develop your airport. For Forest Lake, we're primarily looking at building area options, knowing that you're already, all your current spaces to lease hangars, to build hangars on are leased out. You're in the development and growth phase, so part of what Chris will talk about is areas to expand development of hangars. And then looking at runway extensions, that was something that came through on the user surveys. At 2,700 feet is great for the small general aviation pilot, but with the way that the city is growing and interest and activity at the airport, kind of getting an extension to allow for some approaches to be developed is kind of on the precipice. So something that would be good to plan for the airport. So the schedule has been kind of revised to kind of match the Forest Lake meeting schedule of being every other month. So some of these were shifted just a month later because they fell on a month where there wasn't going to be a meeting. So right now we're still on schedule with the facility requirements, alternatives review. The plan is after this meeting, based on the comments we get here from the Airport Commission, we'll make whatever revisions and modifications that are necessary to the alternatives. And I may bring those back to you in May for just discussion, but that won't be a full-blown update meeting. But the hope is that when we get to July, we'll be able to have the one final preferred alternative that everyone is comfortable moving forward with to start the development of the airport layout plan, which will show the 20-year development for the airport. From that, we follow up with an implementation plan, which is more text and updating of the capital improvement program to show, okay, working with Mr. Undum financially, when are these projects feasible? How can you take advantage of state funding to offset the local share? Start looking at, okay, we know what we want to build at the airport. Now let's look at when and how we can finance it. And then in January, the plan would be to do the final review process for the master plan and the airport layout plan. So what we're planning on discussing, like I've talked about here, is just a review of the facility requirements that was driven by the user surveys here. look at the building area alternatives. There's 3 that Chris will discuss in more detail, and then looking at the runway extension alternatives. There's 2 that will be discussed kind of based upon what the airport is currently zoned for, what would be the maximum runway extension that you could get without having to make major financial modifications to Forest Road that's there, which just kind of limits the length that you could get. So kind of based on the user surveys, like we had discussed last time, the need for more hangars was a common theme across the user surveys there. There were a number of people that responded who said they would base their aircraft at Forest Lake if a facility for rent existed, or if they were able to take a land lease. But at the current time of the survey, there were no land leases available for anyone to build. Different people responded differently, whether or not they would rent if there was a T hangar unit available, or if they would like to build their own, or if somebody built a larger bay hangar facility, if they could rent from there. There was a number of responses for each one saying, they'd either build or rent if possible. And then something to discuss here with the commission is sizes of the hangars. There's a commercial hangar that's going up right now, 120 by 80. Chris will discuss where there'd be some ideal lots for some larger hangars, larger than the 60 by 60s that are in most of the private area right now, to kind of see if there is another business or potential some other large hangar that's needed, where those could go. I mentioned kind of runway extensions. What a lot of users said, if 3,000 feet would allow them to operate more at the Forest Lake Airport. Others said 3,300 would be better to allow them to bring larger type of aircrafts in here. At a 3,300, like a King Air 200 could operate, in and out of Forest Lake at no problems. And then at a 3,300 foot length, you could also would be eligible for approaches. An RNAV GPS approach is something that you could put in at 3,300, whereas the FAA is not keen to putting approaches in for airports less than that length, because they consider those more visual only types of runways. And then Jet A fuel was mentioned on a couple of the user surveys. I'm not sure if you guys know if there's a huge demand, if there's ag sprayers that would like to see Jet A fuel out there. MoGas was also mentioned as a possibility on some of the user surveys. We know that's not real popular at airports right now, but I know like South St. Paul has it. I believe Waseca does.
South St. Paul, I believe, now has no MoGas, and they have Swift Fuel instead.
Okay. So that's something to kind of discuss as well. So before Chris kind of details into the alternatives, there's 3 different building area alternatives that are drawn. The key to note is that you can mix and match development shown on the alternatives. We've kind of spaced them out just to show you different ideas, but it doesn't mean if you see something on alternative 1, you like something on 2, you like something on 3, we can mix those together then to give you a new alternative review. So just want to make sure everyone's clear on that. We show box and T hangars as options here. I know T hangars are something that to get funding from the state, it's going to be costly, being you'd have to use the loan program. So I know that'll be something that gets discussed in consideration for it. We can discuss if you guys have questions. I know Mr. Steeler before the meeting mentioned developing hangars in some other areas that aren't shown. We can go through that discussion as well. And then look at, if you guys want to extend the runway, if you want to do a future extension to like 3,000 feet and then an ultimate to 3,300, those are all options that you have on the table. I guess I'll pause there if there's any questions. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Chris to kind of get into more detail about the alternatives.
The runway extensions, when we've been looking at this thing for years, the issue's always been not necessarily the highway, but those high wires that are along 61. Is that still the case, or?
We haven't done an airspace analysis to that level as of yet, Mr. Husnick, but that very well could be something that would have to get reviewed assuming they're 20 foot tall, we can run a quick airspace calculation to see if they would be penetrations to the approach surface.
I think that was the issue last time when we were discussing paving the runway,
Sure.
because we just couldn't go with a full blown part. But anyways, The wish list is there, that's for sure.
Nope, that's definitely true.
Thanks, Alice. So, thanks, guys. We're going to get into kind of some of the meat on the alternatives and stuff that we've developed for you guys to take a look at here. Like Silas had mentioned, and we talked about a bit last time, the big need for you guys right now is hangars. There's no available space, and there's obviously a large demand out there, according to the people we've talked to, the user surveys, all that stuff. So some of the alternatives, and like Silas had mentioned too, keep in mind, let's have this be an open discussion too. If you guys have something, throw it out there. We can combine stuff. We can do something you'd like to see. This is just kind of the first few ideas we had on what we see that we can do to get you a bunch of hangar space out there, I guess. So if we just look at the figure that we've got up here, right now we're just looking at just the existing conditions. So we're just showing the safety areas, your runway object-free area, your runway safety area on your current standards. So this is it's designed to a B2 aircraft. As we saw from the user survey, currently you guys are a B1 critical design aircraft. However, you guys are designed for the B2 like we had talked about, which is a little bit larger aircraft, a little bit larger approach speed. So that's something where we can, if you're already designed for that, we want to protect for that, and we don't want to get landlocked in on something by having these smaller areas, and then in a couple years, we do have a B2 critical design aircraft, and we're not able to accommodate that because we got too small, shrunk in on the safety areas.
And just so everybody's clear, and not just people here, but for the record, a B2 is not a jet.
Nope. It is
I just want to make it clear to the public. It came up
Classification.
before that people thought we were looking to expand the
Okay.
runway to bring in jets. And
And
make it absolutely clear that that is not.
And I apologize, I should have brought maybe my graphic that I had last time that showed the breakdown between B1 and B2. It's really just dependent on the approach speeds and the wingspan and tail height, essentially. We are still talking about small general aviation aircraft, single engine aircraft, some light twins, but generally single engine aircraft, 6 passengers or less, essentially. So yes, if anybody needs any further explanation on the B1, B2 thing, we are not by any means talking about large commercial aircraft coming in, I guess. So let's go ahead and hop into the first alternative here. So this is really kind of trying to maximize, actually we're going to start with the kind of the commercial development area, which is kind of in the central area, very close to the 80 by 120 that you guys have just in the process of being constructed out there right now. So this area is, we've got a couple issues. So if we see the green, the light green and dark green kind of striped areas, those are what Washington County has identified it as delineated wetland areas. So without further delineation, that's what we have available to us for wetland. We kind of want to stay away from those areas. I know it's not impossible to build in those areas, but we are going to come into a lot more costs, environmental issues, such like that. So we generally try to stay away from there unless that's the only option we have. So kind of looking at the commercial development area, as you see, we're showing the 80 by 120 that's currently going up. And then what we're doing is we're just essentially extending the taxi lane coming out right there, so we can fit a handful of additional hangars right there.
What are those scaled at, just out of curiosity?
As far like,
For size, you mean?
Yeah, what did
80
you-
by 80.
80 by 80.
80 by 80.
yep, those are all 80 by 80s right there, the 4 in the line there, next to the 80 by 120.
I'm sorry, I couldn't see that on the digital presentation.
Okay, yep.
I see it here on the printed out presentation.
Now, that's lot size.
We have that essentially as you could do 80 by 80 hangars
Oh, okay.
there.
All right.
I guess I think the zoning ordinance is approximately a 20-foot building separation, so they might need to be split a little bit more there, but we do have enough room to essentially house 4 80 by 80s there. And this is something too where if you guys have feedback on that, where we'd really like to see some 100 by 100s, or maybe if we're going to have people come in with corporates, we want to see 80 more. We just want to see a line of 80 by 120s there. That's all we want to see. That's the stuff where we can, kind of make that happen to show you for the alternative so we can get it on the ALP. So if you see behind there too, then we're essentially extending the parking, extending the parking. So that's one of the great benefits of this area too, is you guys kind of already have the corporate use. It's right by the parking. A lot of the corporate use people are going to want to have easily accessible parking and not have to have, clients park on the other side of the airport and come walking a mile across the airport to get to their business and their corporate hangar there. So like I said, it's a pretty easy expansion right there. We don't get into the wetlands. We can expand the parking. We can expand the taxi lane off and get some corporate hangars in there. And we've kind of, with being locked by that wetland, there isn't a whole lot of options there. You do get into the possibility there's a small amount of land kind of behind the parking there too. But then you start kind of cutting off the existing parking area to get back there for a small portion of land. But that's kind of what we have for the corporate area there, and it kind of stays the same as we don't have a whole lot of options to work with, but feel free to provide any input, and we'd be more than happy to kind of reorganize that for your guys' liking.
If hangar space is precious there, then you would take the parking lot and angle it up,
Yep.
and then you could have another taxi lane where you've depicted parking.
Yep.
And you could have a few more hangars in there, if that was that precious.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. You've already thought of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then let's go ahead. So let's keep in mind that this is, just kind of our stock area. We're going to show this on the corporate area is the same for the next few alternatives. So
Could that be changed over time if there was heavy demand for it?
Well, he just said it. I mean, we can modify it as we go
Yeah,
here.
okay.
yeah. By all means, if you guys, if you know that, hey, 4 80 by 80s just isn't enough. I know 4 businesses right now that are going to move in once we get lots. We'll know that we need to, accommodate that.
TOFA to get back there would be the issue.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Silas. So that's one of the issues too, that we don't have hangars extending back there, is essentially we do have object-free areas, taxi lane object-free areas. So essentially coming along that taxi lane object-free area, Silas and I actually talked about this a while ago, we'd have to kind of do a funny jog around the 80 by 120 and clear the taxi lane object-free area off of that building enough. So it would kind of be a funny S-curve jog around that we'd have to get back there to cut off the, as you kind of just looked at there too. So, but like I said, any input we will definitely take and apply to these to get to your liking. So let's go ahead and just take a look at kind of the north area down here. So this one is maximizing hangar space. This we are showing 8 8-unit hangars, 8 8-unit T hangars, and 1 6-unit T hangar. And this kind of, we're trying to line them up with the existing hangars you got there. We do also have some other line work that we'll talk about at some point. I know I think Don had kind of brought it up here a little bit that we do have some areas we need to avoid out there, but that's an awful lot of T-hanger space back there, Everything is designed back there for Group 1 aircraft. It's going to be smaller aircraft, single-engine aircraft that would be utilizing the T-hangers. 79-foot object-free areas back there on the sides of the taxi lanes going through the T-hanger area.
Excuse me, I noticed you stopped well short of Highway 97.
Yep.
What's the reason for that?
There's absolutely no reason on that. Man, do we want to have 17 T-hangers back? You know what I mean? It's just...
I understand. I mean, I think your other plans do, well, we'll go to the other pages, but they make stuff.
The only other options is kind of preliminary I had in mind, So my thoughts were, just to think it out loud here with you guys, my thoughts were kind of, if regardless of any of these options, I think there's a little space there close to the highway that's left. Depending on which option you go with, I think you might possibly want to get into some additional auto parking or something back there too. So I kind of have a little bit of that, earmarked in the back of my head. Based on which alternative you go with, that's kind of, will dictate, you know, how many hangar spaces are back there and how much auto parking we would want to put back there too, or whatever. Because of the easy access off of the highway right there, it's the only way to kind of get the access for automobiles without, you know, traversing across the airport essentially. So anyway, this one is kind of the maximized aircraft. If we're putting in T-hangars like this, there's a lot more aircraft on the field here. So this is just an example showing you, you know, to get maximum airplanes on the field here. If we go down to the other end then, towards the south, so that's essentially showing 60 by 60 hangar spaces. So that's where like maximum hangar size would be approximately 60 by 60. I believe Silas has the lots on here. So those would be 80 by 110 lots roughly. 80 by 90 lots, sorry, thanks Silas. So we're actually showing kind of the maximum hangar footprint is what we like to show. That doesn't mean you can't do a 50 by 50 hangar there or something like that. This is kind of just based off the taxi lanes we have drawn. This is the maximum building footprint that you could have for those lots. So this,
Excuse me just a second. I think, you know, the 80 by 90, that's the lots we're building on now. Correct. 7,200 square feet. With the building code the way it is, or at least was, as long as you had the firewall separation, you could be 5 feet from the lot line, a 10-foot separation, so that gave you a 70-foot hangar.
okay. We were actually just talking with Mr. Undum a little bit beforehand to try to determine exactly what the zoning spread is, so.
But that's what the way the buildings are being built out there now.
Okay, perfect,
So,
yep.
just so you know.
So we can adjust that too if we get, whenever we have the exact, so it's 10 feet then, I take it?
Yeah.
If they have firewalls?
I'll double check with Corey on it to make sure, because that's
Okay.
what we've been doing out there.
Yeah.
There are some hangars that are only 10 feet apart.
Okay, if we can verify, we'll move that spacing too, you know, we're just going off what we've
Sure.
looked up or been told or whatever. So right now, we do have those spaced at roughly 20 feet. So that would be like 10 feet on each, you know, person's,
Right.
on their lot on the side. But by all means, please let us know if you can find that.
Well, what happened, this 20-foot spacing, this goes way back to when Keith Willie was here, you know?
Okay.
And he said, well, if we had 20 feet spacing, we didn't need firewalls and all that. Well, then he came back and said, no, that's not true. You guys got to put firewalls in.
So then it wasn't worth it to get that spacing
Right,
anyway,
I
yep.
said, well, if you're going to do firewalls, how close can we get? He said, well, 10 feet then.
Okay,
And either way, you've got to have them in there, so that was the argument. But, I mean, there's nothing wrong with a 60 by 60 hangar, don't get me wrong.
okay,
But it can be maximized
Yep.
up to 70 feet.
yep. And like I said, we can definitely shift these two. And if that's, you know, if you'd like to show the 70s by 70s on here as a maximum lot size or something, and we can, I mean, 70 by 70s would be the exact same thing if we, if we
60.
took down that spacing. Yep.
60 by 70, yeah. that's
Okay,
what they-
60 by
yeah,
70?
Yep.
Not a problem. We can definitely do that on there. So we'll move all the 60 by 60s to 60 by 70s or whatever.
Well, it's just a comment, and just so that we maximize a lot. That's
No,
all.
yep, we appreciate that, so. Thanks, guys. And any other like comments or questions on this alternative right here?
Did you depict a wetland crossing the taxiway there?
There is a wetland essentially crossing the taxiway. That would be something that, if it got to that point, we would have to have that delineated, I would guess.
I think that was, this delineation was before the runway and taxiway were paved and constructed, so I think that's old, that is obviously not there.
Do the wetlands ever change size over time?
They do change size over time.
Bigger or smaller?
Yes, there is changes in the wetlands. I know that this delineation, off the top of my head, this would likely have been done at a really large scale, probably with some remote sensing data, some aerial imagery at a large scale. So this isn't like set in stone. This is just to give you guidelines of where it might be. I think if there was a large enough project, I think we would have, I know we have delineators at work that would likely go out there to delineate and give us an exact boundary so we knew what was actually there. It might not be there anymore. It could have grown a little. I don't know, truthfully, but that's just the Washington County National Wetland Inventory currently.
Right.
Can't you go in and change some of that wetland, like a 2-for-1 deal? where for to move the wetlands further to the north where that ag land is currently not being used, right in the center. If you were to dig, fill in some of the wetlands along the commercial and dig it further north, provide a wetland there, is that a possibility or not?
I'm not super,
Yeah, if, I mean, maybe Mr. Dahlbeck was here, but if you recall, when those east taxi lanes were initially constructed, that area was wetland. So what the city had to do at that time was do a 2-to-1 land swap. So you can, eat into the wetland as long as you develop it at a 2-to-1 ratio somewhere else, so.
Right, because we've got, that ag land is currently not being used, so.
Correct.
I mean, if you could shift everything to the north, that would provide you a whole lot more area in that commercial area.
Yeah, because that's a good point, because the reason why you're not seeing any development in the ag land is because it's landlocked. You can't access that with a vehicle coming from either 97 or coming off of Forest Road there, so it's not an ideal spot for development, because then you're gonna have to have vehicles coming across the taxiway. But, I mean, if that's not something we can show on the ALP unless we know for sure the wetlands are being mitigated.
That'd be a, oof.
That'd be
Yeah.
a tough sell.
I mean, it'd be a costly deal moving the earth,
Yeah.
It just depends on how available that property becomes.
And in the future, that would still be a possibility to do with what we show here. But that's, would be way down the road.
Maybe way in the future or something. Right now, I think we need to concentrate on these possibilities we have here.
Yep.
Because,
all right. Any other questions on this one, or should we go to the next one? Perfect. So let's take a look at alternative 2 here then. So alternative 2. Oops. There we go. So this kind of just shows a mixture in the north side here. Once again, the commercial development areas kind of remain the same, so we won't talk about that again right now. But if we look at the northeast side, I guess, we can see this is kind of the mixture of both private individual hangar land leases, as well as a good chunk of T hangars coming down. So this is kind of the best of both. We can get a lot of aircraft in those T hangars, and we still have quite a few lots left available for development over there. So I think in this one, same thing, we're also showing the 60 by 60s. We can definitely modify that to the 70 by 60s that we had talked about with that building code difference, get them a little closer together. So this is kind of the mixture north side here. And then let's go and look at the south side, kind of the expansion of the existing area that you guys have. So on this one, we're just showing some smaller options. So this shows like a 40 by 40 footprint. So you can definitely get some more units in there, but they are going to be smaller units. I believe this is also with a 20-foot spacing on that. So once again, if we got them a little closer with the 10-foot that you guys had indicated with the firewalls, we could definitely get more units in there, or even expand those to a 50 by 40 or something along those lines, whatever you guys would like to see for options there.
I can tell you from experience, a 40-foot wide building is not enough for me. I can't hit the hole without dinging a wing.
You should be able to do a 50 by 50 building there without an issue.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. But that would be a good alternative really for
And
smaller.
40s are just kind of the smaller, I mean, that's about as small as we see for a hangar, with the exception of getting into, a T slot or something like that, so. Any questions on this one, or what we're kind of looking at here? Okay, well, we'll roll right into the next one then and take a look at number 3 here. So this one on the north side, we'll talk about that side first again. This is kind of just a mixture. We show some smaller hangar sizes and some larger 60 by 60s. Once again, we'll get those to the 70 by 60s for you. We can swap those other ones to a 50 by 40, or any option. This is kind of just showing a larger development. You guys do already have the 1 T hangar down there, but this kind of turns it into more of like what you guys have up on the south side here, as individual lots or lease locations.
All of 3 of these alternatives that you put up in front of us, they all become part of the MLP, or we have to decide on specific?
The ALP.
ALP. is.
Yep. So essentially, and like Silas had mentioned, we can mix and match and do it. We're just trying to get the ideas out there. So what we'll do is we'll mix and match, and we'll get one really good alternative that fills up everything, and you guys are happy with it. And yep, this is, has enough T-hangers, has enough whatever. Once we get it dialed to your guys' liking, then that's what will become the preferred alternative that will go on to the airport layout plan.
The one thing that I found as inconvenient was that the previous plan, for instance, showed those T-hangers at the south end. And whenever that was developed, perhaps T-hangers were more affordable, and we just run into this very expensive and time-consuming process of having to go through this.
Yep.
Merely to redevelop that area and show a different set of hangers there. And I just was curious if it can be a more flexible document that can have alternatives built into it.
The document itself isn't necessarily going to have alternatives built into it, but what we would do, or what we would, I guess, suggest in that instance to try to combat that a little bit, is to build out areas that are feasible to start building out, not something that's going to take a mile of taxi lane to get over to this location to start building, something that you can start building kind of piece by piece, and something that gives you the options too, where if all of a sudden in 5 years, somebody does want to build a private entity is going to come build a T-hanger and pay for it and whatnot, there is still an option there, and it's not every one of our lots is lotted out as a private right now.
True.
So we would try to have enough options built into the large alternative to give you, that option a little bit and not landlock you, but that is, it is going to be
The three alternatives, the way the taxiways are run, the taxiways are pretty much consistent for all three options, right? All those
Yep.
blue so alternatives could be adjusted later without having to make any major adjustment.
Yep. And part of that too, I know you had mentioned, Mr. Steeler, a little bit about developing in the area of that home there, essentially.
Right, I had taken that taxi lane, when you go back to that
Yep.
first diagram that shows the trapezoids that have protected space for each
Yep.
approach, you take the taxi lane and take it down straight, and it does not encroach on that. So essentially, those blue taxi lines with the 45 by 40 hangers at the north end now could extend, and you could probably get a half dozen, at least more hangers in there. But if that's something that can be done in the future, that I see that as being way in the future.
So the main reason that we didn't, is we do have some other surfaces too, and we'd be more than happy to put them on there for you. There's actually a whole slew of surfaces. It's not just the approach surface. We've got the approach surface, we've got a departure surface. The departure surface gets to be kind of a tricky deal because you guys are a state-only airport and not a federal airport, I guess. But there are other surfaces that we have to adhere to, not just the Part 77 surfaces. And those, start either at the threshold, just past the threshold, have varying widths and stuff like that. So the thing to keep in mind too is, you're right, there is definitely stuff we could expand that slightly more in some of those areas, and we'd be more than happy to throw those lines on there for you and show you some of the lines and why we've kind of used that area. The one kicker is one, I guess I don't know what's exactly going on with that house, so there would be demolition involved with that or whatever. The other thing is, and we'll actually get to that in just a second here, as you guys do, look towards the future and think about possible approaches and stuff like that. That's where those surfaces do start to get wider as well. So once we start to, so this is a good transit. Well, are we okay to hop to runway alternatives yet, or should we? We'll just do this real quick. Oops. No, we won't. We'll finish talking about this, and once we get to runway alternatives, it might make a little more sense too. We'll see some of specifically the clear zone off the end of the runway gets significantly larger once we get a GPS approach in there. So if we look at just the summary real quick on this too, we've got a nice overview here that just shows the three alternatives for the building areas. Kind of talks about the lot sizes, the corporate hangar area, and talks about the number of units and such like that for each alternative here. So if we actually, so this is where I wanted to, so if we see on this one, we can see that the blue shaded area there off the end of the runways, the clear zones, actually do get significantly larger. This is kind of showing an extension, assuming that with this extension would come some sort of a GPS approach as well. So as we look at that, so that's where we don't want to necessarily build right up to that line.
I understand that now, I see what you mean.
Yeah, yep. But we'd be more than happy to explore any of the options and look at the surfaces and see if we can maximize it right up against there or whatever. We just want to keep that in mind as we look towards the future too of possibly, increasing the size of those clear zones based off the approaches that will come in. So to so that's the mishmash between them. I guess now we're kind of moved into talking about the actual runway options here. I apologize, does anybody have any questions on the building area stuff? Okay, so if you guys have a chance to take a look at these, see what you like, see what you don't like. Maybe you'd like to see some other options. We could get something a little closer somewhere, anything like that. Let us know, and that's kind of where we'll work on tweaking these, combining them, doing whatever, to come back and get the preferred alternative that you guys are happy with and want to work with for the LP.
Yeah, the thing I want to mention about this, guys, is the fact that what we're trying to do is develop an ALP, right? Doesn't mean you have to implement any of it.
Right.
And so that's the important thing, and I think we should try to get as much out there as we possibly can on this, so. And the thing that I'm seeing here, Dan, is that this just my opinion, we may need more meetings than every other month just to get this worked out, and so I think you guys have given us a lot for discussion, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So,
Perfect. Well, we're hoping you guys got some good feedback for us too, so.
yep. Everybody should just come up with an opinion of their own and pass it on to Silas and this gentleman here, and then.
And copy everybody else on it too, so
Yeah,
you know
we'll
where you
just
stand.
kinda-
I just think that
Everybody gets a lick
in
at
the
it.
south end, it should be 60 by 60 or now 70 by 60, like
Yep.
Sam said, because we currently have a hangar waiting list of more than 9 hangars, 14 people. So I think we should just do that on the south end. And on the north end, I really don't care what, I love the mixes that you presented, by the way.
Okay. Thank you.
I agree with Sam, 40 by 40 is too small, but with the 20-foot spacing, it'll be 50 by 40, and it becomes a little viable then at least. And 50 by 40, you can get a decent-sized airplane in there. And I don't really care what we do on the north end as far as, the design doesn't have to be set. I think if we're gonna set a design, I think it should be 9 60 by 60 or 70 by 60 hangars on the south end and worry about the rest later.
The other issue on the north end, building hangars is one thing, but then you got the utility issue on the north end,
I was gonna ask about that too, water.
well, it's more than that.
Yeah.
And then the other issue too is just access to that property would just have to come off Highway 8 or somewhere.
Yeah, and that's kind of like we had mentioned too, on that north side. And that's some of that additional space there is we'd likely have to have additional parking, and entrance off of the highway kind of,
So I-
by that home there.
Don, if you don't mind, I think the airport commission should look at this individually and go draw your lines on her and kind of decide what you think, we can all get it
Should
together.
we, as the commission, draw our lines and meet again, and then
Yeah.
come to a consensus before we send 4 different things to Silas? We
I
can
think
just
so.
come to a consensus and send it to Silas now.
That's my
Well,
opinion.
we didn't.
I think
we
that's a
haven't
great
talked-
idea.
One vote.
We are not scheduled to have a meeting in April.
No,
And
but
in
you
fact,
have
I am-
you have the option to add one at any time.
Yeah.
Okay, and I know some folks are out of town on certain dates, so maybe after the meeting, we'll talk about who's available when and when we can maybe schedule another one and what works for Dan.
I just caution, the conversation was email everybody on the list. Don't do that, it's an open meeting law violation, so make
Right.
sure that if you are, comments need to get dispersed out, that they come to me, I can take care of getting those dispersed. I just wanna make sure we avoid open meeting law
Right,
conflicts.
that's the issue. Yep.
Yes, we'll talk after the meeting on dates available for a follow-up meeting, and that we can get our ideas together and have a meeting just to talk about those. Put together a package to get back to these guys.
So to kind of summarize some of the comments and feedback that we're getting here, I mean, these are kind of some of the talking points that we wanted to get on. So I think the key thing for us is to nail down, a standard hangar size, not the lot size. So Chris showed you 60 by 60 hangars, 40 by 40 we kind of thought was going to be on the small side. Is there a preferred standard lot size that you guys would like to see, for both areas? So for the east building area, do you want a 60 by 60 hangar size, which according to now could be a 90 by 70 lot size, meaning you only need 10-foot separation to the buildings? Or do you want to see kind of a mix and match of, say, 60 by 60 hangar sizes, 50 by 50? Because if you know there's a consensus hangar size that's going to be ideal, that's something we can develop and show that.
Well, the existing lots over there, this is just my opinion, one vote, that's it. The existing lots over that we're building on, they're 90 by 80 lots.
Correct, 90 by 80 lots, but the max hangar size is 60 by 60 to ensure you get 20-foot separation.
Yeah, to get 20%, but that can be worked out, but I think the lot sizes should stay the same. And then the logistics of the building size, that could be worked out with the building official.
Okay, so if the lot is gonna remain 90 by 80, you wanna maximize the width then of the hangar, because it'll still be 60 deep, but you could get 70 wide? Okay, so that's,
Yeah, the lot sizes won't change.
Well,
on those.
then it's kind of commensurate with what we already have there.
correct. The only difference would be the hangars would be closer together for those two rows.
Well, some of them are already that
Okay.
close together.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, and so they'd still have that option. A 60 by 60 hangar, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that if you have all the same lot sizes, you can make that option to go a
Sure.
little bit bigger,
And now that's just for the south, so for the southeast side, would you guys want to keep, a 60 by 70 hangar lots on the north end? Or is that an area where you'd like to see different sizes there?
I think it's gonna be more discussion, because we need to
Sure.
get into talking about what utilities, if utilities are not gonna be available the same way, maybe we build a lower cost, or, smaller options
Right.
that are lower cost, and, we're keeping the south end consistent, so all those lots are the same, the hangars will be relatively the same. And now that we're talking about this different area of the airport at the north end, it may be an option for smaller hangars, or lower cost might come into play.
Sure, because like on this layout that you see here, Chris had drawn 60 by 60s and 40 by 40s, but you can, mix and match. Now, one of the questions that came up was, so let's say on the ALP it shows, it's a 50 by 50 lot, but if you have space to put in a 60 by 60, that's something, or a 60 by 70, that's something you surely can do. As long as the ALP shows it's an area for hangar development, you're fine in that respect to make a modification like that. I think where it might cause some confusion is, I know, the lot sizes are all standardized for leases and things like that here, so that's something that's established well before anybody builds.
I think that's what the guy has to do, is really kind of determine what the lot sizes are gonna be. Because the building sizes could vary a little bit depending on coding and what personal preferences are,
Correct, as long as you know the lot size. So if you know this is the max hangar size is a 60 by 70, we can run with that. Or if you do want to see, personally, I think a smallest size hangar you'd want is like a 45 wide by 40 deep. That gets you a 44.5 foot wide door, and that can accommodate most, small general aviation aircraft. But that's just my own thought and from what I see from other airports.
Sure.
But that's kind of if we know kind of on that north side what type of hangar sizes that you guys would like, then we can develop lot sizes from that. On the corporate hangar area, we showed 80 by 80. Is that an area you guys want to keep 4 larger hangars, or is that something where,
I think that's the right place for larger hangars, is that area. So
Well-
whether there's gonna be 4 of them in the future, or maybe just 2 that are, 160 by 80 or something like that, or 3.
Right.
That, I mean, what you have blocked out, that space where those 4 hangars are and the taxis extended, I think that's the right.
Well, the neat thing about that too is the fact that you got public access to those hangars.
correct?
You know.
And just because it shows a max hangar size of 80 by 80, again, if someone leases the land, they don't need to construct to that sizes. But I'd imagine the city's intent would be, hey, we're going to hold those for, larger aircraft that want to base there and build. But I could see a scenario where if those 9 lots to the east are developed, that would be the next logical spot to start looking at development. So at least we got that part good. I mean, and then T hangars, is that something that you guys want to show? Like I mentioned, if you show a T hanger and it switches to lots, there's nothing prohibiting you from doing that, because the ALP is going to show hangar development if it shows a T hanger, and if you say later on you want to convert it to private lots for rent, that's surely
Okay.
within your purview. Just showing a T hanger doesn't obligate you to that.
There's not being able to work it
Right,
back and
we
forth.
gotta be able to change it,
So-
because cost-wise, at least right now in this time frame, anyone who's looked into the construction of it, it's just not feasible.
Right, so like on this building alternative 3 that Chris had drawn here, it shows a row of 60 by 60s and then it shows a T hanger. If this was on your ALP, it wouldn't prohibit you from turning that T hanger into private lots. So just showing different types of hangars doesn't lock you in. As long as it's an area for hangar development, you can change that. So if that's a concern that you have.
Okay.
But if you don't want to show any T hangers, we can surely go with all, box hangers, whatever you guys think. We can take your feedback.
I could see showing some down at the north end in that.
Sure.
In the area that's yet to be even thought of development-wise.
I think the T hanger thing's been tried like over in Osceola, and I don't know if it worked out that great for them,
Yeah, the unfortunate part, I know Mr. Undum, he and I worked together and ran some numbers, even taking advantage of the state funding that is available to construct an 8-unit T hangar, I think your rents were going to have to be almost $400 per bay per month
Yeah, and that's-
to amortize the cost of the loan that the city would get from MnDOT. So, yeah, you're not going to get $400 a month.
And that's based on the thing being full,
Correct.
And so, that's one of the reasons this committee's been kind of leaning away from it, from doing that. But as long as there's that possibility of going back and forth with this, as long as it's a hangar area, we can, because who knows what's gonna happen in the future, but,
Correct, and I mean, if you show a whole row of box hangars and you have a developer says, well, I want all of them to construct a T hangar, there's nothing prohibiting you from going that route.
okay.
Well, that's good, at least we got some feedback on the hangar sizes. We'll make some tweaks to the layouts, obviously, and then see what type of comments that you guys come back with. And then kind of runway length, you're currently zoned, so the zoning ordinance for Forest Lake is zoned for a 3,300-foot, runway length. Chris kind of had 2 options in here, either a 300-foot extension to get you to 3,000 or a 600-foot extension to get you to 3,300. Is there any rationale here where, maybe Mr. Huston can speak more on it, where if you're going to extend the runway, you want to do it just one time to get it to the maximum length? Or would there be any thoughts of, let's say 5-10 years from now, get it to 3,000 and then see what happens from there if we need to make another 300-foot extension? I mean, what's the,
As far as I'm concerned, it's always been part of our ALP.
correct,
To extend it out to 600 feet. And the only reason we couldn't was because of the obstructions on the south end, namely the wires.
correct.
And so, I think it should stay in the ALP that this is what we're gonna want for the future. But it
So
may.
you're saying the extra 600 feet?
Right, that's the way it is now. I don't
Even
think-
Correct.
though, I
Why
mean.
change back?
Right, but just to be clear, right now, we have absolutely no intention of asking for funding to extend the runway in any way, shape, or
We just want to, we want to
We
make
just,
sure. it's-
the flexibility that 20 years in the future or whatever, that is still there. That's what MnDOT Aviation set forth when they came in and paved the thing, and we don't want to lose that, we don't
Well,
maintain that.
it's all part of the original ALP.
The original ALP, the original plan.
Yep. Now, that's a good thought process to go to 3,300, because then you could you would be eligible for approaches to both ends. You know, as part of the ALP, we'll survey the light poles that are there. We may already actually have those surveyed back when we had discussions about putting obstruction lights on there. So you'll see that in the ALP, that going with that 600-foot extension, you know, there would be some power poles that would have to probably be buried underground, and those are things that can be worked out after the fact, but I wouldn't stop you from showing that 600-foot extension, so.
They're very high wires there, and they're high tension, you know, the type that we were told that they'd have to go into conduit and all this other stuff, you know?
Correct.
So it was really expensive to, so we were hoping something would happen on 61 that didn't involve us, where the wires would go, you know?
I don't blame you. I mean, most
So-
new power lines are buried underground, so that could be the case. But, you know, the whole goal here is to try to work towards, you know, a preferred alternative. I know Mr. Steeler asked the question, do all these alternatives get shown on the ALP? And that's not the case. You know, you show one building area, and that's what you move forward with. But like I mentioned, you know, you can show box hangers, you can show a T hanger, and interchange them when it actually comes towards development.
That part is good news, I think, so.
So kind of where we're at to kind of close this thing up is kind of the next steps is to take the comments that we've heard here from you guys in person, and then, like Mr. Undum mentioned, email them any other comments that you got. I know Mr. Steeler is going to draw some things up. That's fine if you want to just redline the layouts and send them to us. We can review them and let you know if it's possible or not. The goal would be at the next, you know, commission meeting in 2 months to bring these back to you for at least review and some more discussion, with the hopes then that in July we can have kind of the final alternative. So if the need arises to have a meeting, say between, you know, May and July to kind of do another iteration, we surely could. Or if you guys want to meet next month, that's something that's a possibility as well.
That's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see us having a public discussion after we've had a month to look at these, each one of us, not talking to one another, but come to the next meeting with, you know, here's my idea, here, what's your idea? Let's get this hashed out, and then we can send that on to you guys and get it done with, you know?
Sure. I mean, if you guys are able to provide your comments within 2 weeks,
Yeah.
that'll give us time to kind of turn around and make the edits if the need does arise to meet in April.
We just have to have a public discussion about it. That's the only issue is with the, so that's really gonna have to be with a public meeting. So,
Correct.
as far as I'm concerned, we should have a meeting, and I'd make a motion that we do have another meeting in April
Sure.
to discuss this, so.
I'd support that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have,
To have an
when
April
you
meeting.
suggest a meeting in April, are you suggesting the first Wednesday of April?
Whatever works out for everybody. The first
That does
Wednesday's
not
been the
work
typical.
for me.
Okay, let's pick a date.
My phone's
I'm pretty,
not on.
I'm gonna be pretty flexible.
Can we make it, I mean,
me see what I
today
got.
is March the 4th. Can we make it later in March, or even in a couple weeks from now? I mean, I don't know
Yes.
how much time you guys
You
need to look
know-
at this stuff.
If you wanna do it on a Wednesday, we could do it on the 25th then.
Yes.
I don't have my, actually, I do
Well,
have
here,
my flights.
there's the calendar
I
right
know,
there.
but I don't know what.
Oh, you don't have your schedule.
I do, but it took me a while. The 25th is a Wednesday.
Yes.
Third Wednesday, and it's, yeah, the only other Wednesday in March.
I think that's gonna work. I think that's gonna work.
Well,
So-
then I changed my motion that we have a meeting on the 25th of March at 6 PM.
Support.
We have a second. Any other discussion on that? All in favor of the Wednesday, the 25th of March, 6 PM, for a meeting to discuss the ALP? All in favor? Aye.
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 It passes. We will have a meeting at 6 PM. This will be a public meeting right here. And the airport commission members should come with their ideas for each individual area, and members of the public can probably pick up this packet from the city if, and welcome to be here as well and give their input, yeah.
So if I'm clear, so for that meeting, you guys are going to provide your comments, or will you be able to provide your comments
After that meeting.
to Dan before that meeting, and we can bring some revised layouts for further discussion at that meeting?
Well, it's gonna be hard to discuss it.
I think that's gonna be our time to
That's just
discuss the stuff.
Sure.
And then we will hopefully get you a summary at that time, or get it to Dan.
Gotcha,
He'll get it to
okay.
you.
So at that meeting, you don't want to see anything different at this juncture?
No, it's-
Gotcha.
The problem is the open meeting law, so.
Yeah,
Sure.
We can't just meet in my hangar and talk about
No.
it, so.
All right, well, with that, that kind of wraps things up.
Yeah.
If you got any questions in the interim, we'll definitely be attending that meeting coming up later this month as well.
Yeah.
Okay, do we need them to be here? I mean,
That's up to them, I guess.
Well, if you guys are going to discuss it, either Chris or myself would like to be there just
Okay.
so we can provide some real-time analysis. I mean,
Yeah. Right.
if there's something that we know is not going to work, we don't want you guys to go down that route
Right.
and
that's
develop
great.
there. I mean, we know Don's going to buy a Citation Latitude pretty soon, but,
Don't get that out there.
You know, Silas, for that meeting, I guess really what we would need is for the 600-foot runway extension, we would need the boundary lines where we can put hangars and where we can't. I mean, we want to build hangars to maximize the space that we can use with that extension.
But isn't that what the gray area on 600-foot runway extension?
Here,
yeah, the 600-foot extension, Mr. Dahlbeck, is not prohibiting you from still constructing those other hangars, those other possible
That
9
gray
hangers.
area is larger than the gray area on the previous, on this one.
right.
So they've
But where do
incorporated that.
where does this line of hangars roll?
But that's okay, because you can even see, and I can do it on my,
And
when
you
I have
got
it.
setbacks off this too, now, different setbacks is what I'm
No.
saying.
No,
No,
that's
they'd all be the
incorporated.
same.
That
They'd all be the
setback,
same.
that's why that's so
Oh,
much
okay,
wider, that
okay.
setback, and you can kind of see where hangar E is, Echo is there, and it comes down.
Right.
Yeah, so they've already incorporated that in, and that's why they've stopped their hangar lines here where they have. Because if you continue this line where this taxiway is straight down here, and you can superimpose them on top, but I'll.
Well, what we'll do, before that meeting, knowing that you guys want to look at the 600-foot extension, we'll drop that onto the building alternatives.
Yeah.
And
Drop that gray,
So
the
then-
largest one.
correct, so you don't have to flip back and forth
Yep.
between them. You'll see the 600-foot extension on all 3 of those building area alternatives to make it a little bit easier. So we can get that back to you, early next week.
Okay. Yeah,
All right, well, thank you guys for the time.
thank you.
Thanks, Silas. Thanks for your hard work.
Lost my agenda. Okay, next on the agenda this evening, hangar lease rates adjustment. Mr. Schmidt, yeah, I know you put this on there. This is it time again
March,
Adjust.
even numbered years.
for the Consumer Price Index of Minneapolis, St. Paul?
Dan has done some work on this, Dan.
Yeah, members of the commission, so including your packet on the dais is a memo that goes through the lease rate adjustments for 2020 and 2021. Again, this is every other year, even year in March, the commission's supposed to meet, review previous year's CIP and make adjustments based on that previous year's CIP. Back in 2018, if you recall, we agreed, the Airport Commission recommended and council agreed to use CPIU as the one determining CPI for the lease rate adjustments. So what I did is I pulled out the CPIU from January, which says a 3% increase over the previous year. So you have included as the actual memo that came out from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So the CPIU for last year was 3%. So based on that, the staff is recommending that the rents for the airport for 2020 and 2021 be adjusted to represent that 3% increase. So what that does to the lease rates is that they're currently at 10.3 cents for non-commercial. That would increase those to 10.6 cents. And then they're at 15.5 cents a square foot for commercial, and that would go up to 16 cents based on the 3% increase. Additionally, back at the Joint City Council workshop that was just held here, there was some conversation about the elimination of the $280 flat fee. And as of January 1st, 2020, the city's general fund has been fully repaid for all of the paving project expenses that were incurred as a result of that paving project. So if the Airport Commission does desire for that $280 flat fee to be removed, the first step would make a motion to recommend removal. So all of these lease rate adjustments go through, it's a multi-step process. So Airport Commission first makes the recommendation. Council then will review that recommendation and move to accept that recommendation. Well, we have to do this as part of an ordinance adjustment. So it's a lengthier process, but this is the first step. It'll then go to a workshop at the City Council. we'll get feedback from them, seeing if they want to proceed with the recommendation of the airport commission. If that's the case, we'll draft the ordinance and the resolutions that allow for that to happen. And you'd be looking at potentially sequencing it out in mid-April for approval at the city council level. And then it'd be in effect for the we have plenty of time to get these in effect for the 2020 lease rates, because those will go out in July. So we're still plenty of time, but there's a multi-step process here. So what'll happen tonight, if the commission desires a $280 flat fee to be eliminated, I have drafted a recommended motion to that effect, basically stating that the airport commission recommends the 3% adjustment and the elimination of the $280 flat fee. And then just to eliminate any confusion, if there are any hangar owners who have past due amounts on that, it's recommended that those are still owed to the city from, say, if you haven't paid 2019's 280, that would still be owed, but anything future would not be owed because the fee would be eliminated. And then there would be no refunds as well. So basically, the motion is it's eliminated from 2020 moving forward.
Do we have a motion?
Well, I'd certainly make that motion. This has been discussed several different times, and I know that amount got paid off, and it was a terrible thing to happen in the first place. And so I'd make the motion that the airport commission recommend the increasing the annual event as the leased land Forest Lake Airport by 3%, which is based off the previous year's CPI. And additionally, since the general fund has been repaid for the expenses incurred during the paving project, the airport commission recommend the elimination of the $280 flat fee effective July 1, 2020. Furthermore, any past due amounts for the flat rate charge are still due to the city, and no refunds for the past paid amounts will be given.
Is there a second?
I'll support that.
We have a second from Mr. Schmidt. Is there any further discussion on this? And I noticed you put both in the same motion here. I thought we sort of had two separate motions, one for the removal of the flat fee and one for the consumer price index.
It can be done as one.
It can be done as
Yeah,
one
so
motion.
what'll
we're
happen
okay.
here is this motion then will go to the council for the workshop to get feedback from them. Based on their feedback, we'll roll all of this up into a resolution that goes to the council, which then will adjust the fee schedule through an ordinance. So we'll take it through the procedural process and steps it needs to go through.
There's no further discussion. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
That's unanimous, passes, and I trust you will take that onto the city council. I don't need to contact the mayor. or
I'll
do
take it
anything
from
to pass
here.
it on.
We'll bring it on. So there's a workshop in March. We'll bring it to the March workshop. And
Okay.
then based on there, it'll have to go through a 10-day public. The ordinance has to go through a 10-day public review process beforehand. So sequencing that out, we're looking at probably the first meeting in April for final approval of the fee schedule of that ordinance.
Okay.
Guidelines.
Yes, is that agenda item number 5, airport guidelines discussion.
I just, if you don't mind,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I asked to have that on the agenda because I think we need to look at that airport guidelines paper and adjust it so that everybody's on the same page with what's going on in the hangars out there, and everybody can agree on it. So I'm trying to get some feedback from the hangar owners and the EA new chapter that's out there and that kind of thing, and what exactly it should be. So I would like that also to be on the agenda with a copy of the old one, Dan, for the next meeting. if
At
that's
the
okay.
3/25 meeting,
Right.
March
Yep.
25th meeting.
Yep.
We'll also, so those will be the two items.
And
One will be
because,
the
you know,
ALP and.
If we had done that at the beginning and took care of the airport guidelines discussion, we would not have two leases out there right now.
Right.
And it could have been done just simply by everybody saying, listen, we need to clean up our act and get this done right. So that's why I wanted it on the agenda.
Okay. Does anyone on the commission have any other items for the agenda this evening? Anything else to talk about? Others from the floor? Does anyone want to, please let us know who you are and feel free.
I'm Rick Lorenz, hangar number 28, one of the newer hangars on the field there. I did some landscaping in the front of my hangar late last fall. I put some sod in there. And that lot and maybe overall, I didn't do a soil analysis, but it seems to be a lot of clay and it's just mud. And I'm on the hill, Kind of unusual to have a hangar on a hill, but there's a hill behind the hangar. And kind of a long story, but I happen to have a niece who's she's a plant scientist. She has bachelor's and master's and a PhD in plant sciences, Dr. Danielle. So I took some, after I did my sod, I took some pictures of the lot. I tilled everything up. And I said, is there something better than grass to put here? You know, I know there's been water problems. I don't want to have water problems. I don't want to exacerbate anybody else's water problems. I don't want the taxiway behind me to have water problems. I don't want to silt up the storm system. So she suggested some things, and a seed company that she does, she works for a major seed company, another seed company that she knows of. And I sent them pictures, we had a teleconference, and they had suggested maybe some plants with long root systems to help absorb as much water, retain the soil, things like that. So I'm wondering, do I have to plant grass? Can I do something else? I've got some pictures of here, or they're wildflowers. They might be a couple feet tall, which would be a little different than anybody else. I could put some grass next to the taxiway in the back, so people, low-wing airplanes aren't hitting the plants. But if you look at, like last fall, some of the other hangars next to mine, the grass doesn't grow on the bottom of their hills, and they don't have near as tall a hill as I got. So I think there's some solutions, potential solutions here that it may not be normal, but I think it'll look nice. It's just maybe a little different.
I don't think anyone's opposed to some landscaping that's different. I think the difficulty we've had is someone who just lets it go all summer and does nothing, you know, and just lets the grass grow and weeds grow. And if you were doing some other kind of ground cover, I don't think anybody would be opposed to that at all.
Okay,
Well, as long as it looks maintained, I mean, that's part of our
Right.
use out there. It has to be.
yeah. It
maintained
grows up and
kept
it grows a couple feet tall. And they said the only thing to do is in the fall, when, after a first good hard frost, whack it down. And they said they suggested some perennial and some annual over a period of years, since it takes a long time for these plants to mature and, you know, the root systems. So,
But it looks maintained, it doesn't look.
well, here, I'll show
That
you.
would
You want
be
to,
No cutting.
you want to see some pictures?
If it means no cutting, I might be interested.
Yeah. Other than once a year, at the end of the year, you gotta cut it down. I suppose you could rake it up if you wanted to.
I see no issue.
I don't know, you know, everybody's been trying to raise grass out there, I guess, I don't know.
Hey, grass grows everywhere out there.
Yeah, I mean.
A lot
I've
of
got
clover
grass.
grows out there.
I mean, it just.
Did you spray your lot and kill the grass last fall?
Yeah,
Yes.
yep,
Killed it and then rototilled it and,
yep, raked it out, well, especially, I mean, it's muddy, you know, it's,
yeah, but you plant seed out there and you'll have grass. I mean, everybody has done it out there. And I think, you know, if we have no maintenance on one lot, all of a sudden everything becomes no maintenance.
Well, that's what I mean, it depends on how it looks. If it looks maintained still, I mean, there's a lot of landscaping that,
Grow
Looks nice.
wildflowers. There is no maintenance. So,
I'd just be concerned, about how it would look, you know, all summer, if it looks like it's unkept, you know what I mean?
I got some
So-
pictures here if you want to see, Sam.
Well, send them up, we'll take a look and.
Mr. Lorenz, for the record, do I recall you not mowing your lot last year?
I planted the grass, I whacked it down, weed whacked it, killed it, killed it again, put the sod in the front.
right, well, I mean, there was
Just
no.
bare ground now.
Yeah.
I put some sand, I didn't want to silt up the storm
It's
system,
just
so I put some
kind
sand.
of
in
like
it.
an unmaintained.
That stuff does grow, I mean, I noticed, it's been wet, because the rain was relentless last year, there's no question about it. But, boy, for the most part, people, this stuff, you just keep mowing it, it just turns into grass, what I've seen out there.
Right.
I'd be a little bit concerned about that, only because of the difference in how it looks with everybody
Right,
else.
it will look unkept if it looks like that. I mean, it'll look, you'll see all these hangers with
I
mowed
cer-
grass,
I
and you'll see a
understand the
hanger
problem out
with
there, don't get me
2
wrong.
foot high, you can call them wildflowers, okay, they're wildflowers, maybe they're weeds, maybe they're wildflowers, they look like weeds to me.
Wildflowers
But-
only blooms. Weeks out of the year, you know?
But it would not look neatly kept like the other grass lots, and that, I think, would be could be problematic if others then just chose, well, I'm not gonna cut my lawn, cause he's not cutting his. That's where I see the possible problem.
The lot I'm on is unique.
Is it? I mean, mine was,
It's the
I know
tallest.
you're right above me probably, I'm
Yeah,
22.
It's
Yeah,
6
well,
feet tall, you know.
Mark Lynch's grass on the end grows just fine, he maintains it. He's one hanger away from you.
The one next to mine?
Yeah, the brown one on the end, the taxiway. You got a lot between you and him.
He doesn't have a hill.
There's hills, well, they're pretty much all the same hill there. In the backyard you're talking?
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll grow and you can maintain it, you just have to maintain it. I mean, what it looks to me, Rick, is you're looking not to do any maintenance. You know, that's kind of
Well,
what it looks like.
it's not I don't wanna get blamed if there's flooding problems.
I don't,
Grass isn't, you know, grass.
I don't see it being a
Grass doesn't
flooding
have a
problem.
very deep root system,
I don't think so either.
you know, as compared to plants like this. So if we do get a heavy rainstorm and the water runs into the taxiway behind me, or the hangers behind me, I don't really wanna get blamed for that either. Or
Once you've got- Once you have established grass, you
We
won't
don't
have
wanna
problems.
stilt up the system, you know, the storm system either, the drain is on the bottom of the hill there. So, I mean, if you don't want me to, that's fine, I can put grass in there, but if something happens in the future, I just don't want to get blamed for
That won't happen.
I would prefer grass.
it. Okay,
I would prefer just plain grass and just mow it.
okay.
And it'll take a year or two for it to take. I really appreciate the sod in front of your hanger. I think it's gonna look great. But I think I'd prefer grass.
Okay.
Just mow it.
Yep.
Okay.
Anyone else? No? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Oh, wait, wait a minute.
You had your chance.
No, I did not have my chance.
You can still have a discussion.
No, no discussion. Call the question.
What's that?
Call the question.
Call the question. All in favor of?
Aye.
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 Adjourn. We are adjourned. All in favor? Yes.